Hello, hello. The title says The Philadelphia Project. I always hate that title. So, around 2007, I began developing a story adapted from my life. And it was so I had another story that I reworked based on the events of my grandfather dying. So originally around 2005, 2006, I started creating this sort of generic story of this ambitious teenager, and I have this montage of him being asked in high school what does he see of the future, and it like cuts through, um, like shows him think envisioning the future and what space looks like, and basically how far. Basically, in that story, I have that character going around poaching high class interns from Fortune 500 companies. So he goes around to Microsoft, Apple, Google, and stuff, and he finds high profile interns, and he's forming his own company, his own incubator, his own think tank. And after the death of my grandfather, I converted this story into an adaptation of my life that was more in line with like a Romeo and Juliet. Um, but a lot of my interest and studies were incorporated into the male protagonist. So he's like a healthcare lobbyist. I'm a healthcare lobbyist. I studied health law. I studied health law at Seton Hall. I was pre-med biology. I've been I've been training my entire life to take over my father's private practice. Um, I fell more in line with the administration and legal aspect of healthcare, so I'm not involved in direct patient care currently. I am studying clinical psychology, and so that's one thing that the character. I feel like I feel like someone is like it's very hard to speak right now. The words are being resistant coming out of my mouth. The male protagonist is me. He shares my interests. He shares my hobbies. He shares my likeness. He physically looks like me. He behaves like me. He has the nickname Silent Night. He's shy. He's calm. He's quiet. And some of his interests are psychology, health law. In the in the story, he develops medical devices, and in reality, that's always something I wanted to do, but I never had the resources to do so. So, an idea I got from my father's private practice is he's an endocrinologist and he works with one touch glucose meters. And for the longest time, I had conceived this idea of having an internal blood monitoring system that would measure all components of the blood rather than just glucose. And it would remove the need to draw blood. And it would give real time blood analysis, and it would show white blood count, red blood count, plasma retention, um, glucose, um, and perhaps it would be an early detection system for any viruses. It would show, blood temperature, and I always wanted to do this, but I never had a laboratory or means of developing this type of technology. In the story, I have the male protagonist working in a laboratory. There's even a laboratory explosion where he gets a chemical burn on his back, and they use a synthetic skin on his back, and it's meant as a scaffold for he has damage to his connective tissue, to his organs, to his vertebrae, and to his skin. So he has this synthetic skin in place to give structural support and also to replace the skin. Um, and it's based on a technology that he was developing in his laboratory. He also developed surgical equipment for laser guided surgery to have precision cuts. He uses this technology in government defense contracting as anti-nuclear technology. It's basically a disarming technology. He also has technologies where he has a satellite that can use genetic material to geolocate anybody on the planet Earth. So if you feed someone's genome into this machine, they'll be able to find out if they're in Paris, if they're in Canada, if they're in Mexico, and based on their genetic component. So I toyed around with, that's how they found Osama bin Laden. They had some of his genetic material and they put it into this machine and they were able to find Osama bin Laden. But some of the things in the story I haven't done in real life. And for the longest time, one of the things I hadn't done is, so both characters, the male and female protagonist, go to Dickinson College. The female protagonist graduates and she goes on to Harvard Medicine. Matthew, my character, gets kicked out of school, and that's based on real events. Now in the story, I think of reasons for him to get kicked out. Some of the laboratory experiments get under the skin of the administration. He does a Gatling gun experiment near Old West on campus, where he takes a machine gun and he shoots window panes to test the shatter pattern. He does so in wind-resistant settings and in a vacuum setting and in regular setting. And I guess this causes some friction with him and the administration. In reality, like this, I would never be able to do this as an undergrad at Dickinson. Like, I don't have that type of research capability at that school. Then he was also involved in like a math scandal where he was given a math proof that was basically unsolvable, and basically he used his connections with the government to solve that proof. This was back when I considered myself a strong math student, but actually when I took math at Dickinson, I took calculus. I should have stuck with discrete math. I felt like I was learning some math in that course. But in calculus, I don't remember doing any math. I remember doing a group project, an oral presentation on Leibniz, and working with the software Maple. But if you ask me if I was doing like limits and like x approaches -1 and f of x, g of x, that type of stuff, I don't recall doing any of that at Dickinson. But anyway, based on these things, my character has some friction with the administration and he gets dismissed, and it happens after the death of his grandfather, and therefore he goes on a Greek tragedy trajectory. And that's similar to what happened in real life, where I was dismissed shortly after my grandfather died. Basically, I was not on track to graduate with my peers, so that's why I was dismissed. And but it just came at such a shitty time after my grandfather died. But one of the things I had in the story, I wasn't sure if I should include my undergrad. I was embarrassed to the place where I went afterwards. But I had the character have his PhD before he had his bachelor's. So what he did was he wrote a dissertation and submitted his dissertation to a degree awarding institution and was awarded a PhD. And I think this is based on something that you actually can do. He has his PhD, and he goes on and he does independent research at Duke University, where he's working under a world-renowned neuropsychologist. He's also a patient of this world-renowned neuropsychologist because of his relationship, his interpersonal relationship with his girlfriend, the female protagonist, whom he broke up with after all these tragedies. So they had a business partner who committed suicide. Matt got kicked out of school. Matt's grandfather died. And he kind of blames his girlfriend, Amy, a lot for these occurrences. Certainly he blames her for his incapability of healing. So he gave her the spotlight. She was a person who wanted to be noted as being the best at stuff, and he took a back seat to her success. And I guess without the presence he once had, it affected his grieving process, where he didn't have the support. He was kind of an afterthought in people's minds. So he didn't have the support to help him get through these tragedies. And he held that against Amy, and he breaks up with her, but then he tries to reconcile later on. This is the girl that he's going to marry. And so I have him doing independent research under this neuropsychologist, and he's also a patient of this person. The research he's doing is on distorted body image. So there's a patient there named Cameron who was abused by her father, and she believes that she has scars on her body. And so at the same time that Matt's working there, Amy, his girlfriend, is also working there, except she's doing independent research as a Harvard medical student. And she interacts with Cameron, and Cameron disrobes to expose her body, which Cameron believes to be covered with scars, only to reveal to Amy that there's not a scar on her body. This is all in her head. She has a distorted body image. So Matt's there working on this sort of... that's the reason why he's there. And for the longest time, I had not been engaged in any psychology schoolwork. I didn't have a psychology class under my belt. Everything was biology, political science, anthropology, geology. So it wasn't until after I graduated that I even took a psychology course. My biology major really didn't have enough time to budget electives. So right now I'm going for my clinical psychology PhD, and so now I'm doing something that the character had done in the story that I hadn't yet done in real life. I've also studied health law recently, and this is something I've always had a personal agenda for health law based on my father's private practice. Now I have formal education from Seton Hall Law School, and the healthcare lobbying stuff really takes more of a... it's more noted in the second story I do, which is more... I always say that the Philadelphia Project is grounded in reality. And by the way, if you want to know why it's called the Philadelphia Project, it's because I was going to Dickinson College, and the story starts off at Chaminade High School in Mineola, New York, and Matt's girlfriend, Katie, just broke up with him. She's going on to Villanova, and she doesn't want to be known as the girlfriend of Matt Gioia. And he had some recognition. He was a 5-star athlete. He was actually an NHL draft prospect. And she didn't want to be known as Matt Gioia's girlfriend. She wanted to create her own identity, so she breaks up with him. So Matt goes down to Duke, where he is a recruit of Mike Coach K, and he tells him, like, listen, pending any drastic change, I'm going to be coming to Duke. And then he goes up to Dickinson, where his sister attends, and he is giving them a final look. Meanwhile, Amy is coming down from UConn. She's a 5-star recruit. She's probably going to go to UConn for their basketball, and she's a legacy at Dickinson, and the two of them happen to meet on a college tour. And Matt convinces Amy to go to Dickinson because it's the only school that they're both applying to and that they're both going to get into. And while they're going there, Amy has an altercation with Matt, and Matt goes to Villanova to speak to Katie. And this is where he rents out an apartment, and this is where he establishes his incubator, and he comes back to Amy and he says, listen, I got an apartment in Philadelphia. You're going to move in with me, and we're going to start this incubator. And he starts recruiting people from the northeast region of schools. So Villanova, Dickinson, NYU, Columbia, Duke, Cornell, Harvard. So anything in proximity. It's located near Villanova, King of Prussia. So I call it the Philadelphia Project. I don't like that title one bit, but that's how it is, and that's why it is, because it's around those prestigious universities. I've had such disdain for Dickinson College. I've toyed around with changing the location of the initial school, where I thought, like, okay, maybe Matt and Amy are going to Cornell, and that kind of works out better for the story in terms of her being a basketball player, because Cornell and Duke are D1 schools. Dickinson is a D2 school, so I had to think of the logistics of promoting Dickinson from D2 to D1. So basically, with him being a 5-star recruit and her being a 5-star recruit, that made Dickinson eligible for NCAA Division One, and they got promoted her second year, and she goes on to win 3 NCAA titles. Um, uh, anyway, so that story is more, I like to say, grounded in reality, a love story, a Romeo and Juliet thing, where there are societal factors keeping those two from being a couple. In the second story, I ditched the reality thing. It is highly influenced by mangas and graphic novels and comic book cultures and video games, and it's still a love story at heart. But the health lobby thing takes front center, where Matt is a healthcare lobbyist. He's already successful. So at this point, they're in their mid 20s. They're like 28 years old in the story. In the first story, it starts off when they're 17, when they first meet for college, and it ends in their early 20s. This story doesn't really make any reference to that because it's technically its own entity, but they have similar backstories. And in this story, he's pushing some healthcare reform through Congress, and Congress makes him believe that it's going to go through, and then it gets overlooked for, funds get allocated for something else, like an energy reform bill. And he feels slighted by this, and he basically gets blacklisted, and he has his eyeballs cut out. And the whole first season is meant to be like a slow burn, where there's a bunch of political assassinations, and it's his technology being used to carry out the assassinations, except that he's blind, he has no eyes. And the female protagonist, Amy, was originally meant to be like a schizophrenic hallucination, where the audience is left to think, is she even a real person? Because the only time she appears is when Matt is by himself. But I scrapped that idea, and basically it turns out that she's carrying out the assassinations. And in the final episode of the season, because that's the way I conceived it in my head, like an episodic show, you see the assassin on a roof, and they look into a scope on a specialized plasma railgun. It's like a sniper rifle, and you can see that the person has an eye, so the audience should be able to conclude that, it's not Matt carrying out the assassinations, because the assassin has an eyeball. But I this story, I changed the title from The Butchers of North Shore to The Culling. I think I'm going to go back to The Butchers of North Shore. I think I'm going to make that the story, but it's certainly not a story grounded in reality. It's heavily influenced. Basically, I took the approach, hey, if Stan Lee can do it, why can't I market a story towards a young adult population? But actually, I'm embarrassed by this story. I don't like talking about it. The other IP, the Philadelphia Project, is one that it's very sentimental to me because it involves the death of my grandfather. I spent a long time working on the detail of the characters. I spent a long time on that story, and that allowed me to copy paste the characters' attributes into other stories and spend less time on those details and more time on the plot. But I just wanted to kind of explain that some of the characteristics of the character of the male protagonist are based on me, and some of the things in the story I have accomplished, and some of the things in the story I have not accomplished. So in the story, I'm not going for a PhD because my character had a PhD in the story. I'm going for a PhD because that's something I would do, and the character is based off me. So that's why the character has a PhD. Now, he's more of an engineer, um, but I wish my undergrad was like that character, where I could do my own independent research and use the facilities at the school for that purpose. You like this? I use my Reiki logo. This is my Reiki logo that I have here. And I put originally I had my eighth grade graduation picture in my biography. Now I decided to use this logo I have in the background, and this is Silent Night. So it's supposed to be carbon strip fiber. It's supposed to be, like a modern day medieval knight. I had an artist render this image, and I hope people can take me seriously with this image. Um, I'm worried about being taken seriously as a professional. When I was in high school, I was very clean cut. I was in good shape. I was in good health. I was fairly good looking. Um, but I put on the freshman 15. I grew an awful goatee, and I looked at some of my pictures and I said, "Gee, I don't look good." In my like mid 20s, I was clean shaved. Well, I had like the 2 day growth. I lost some weight again, and I think I looked presentable. But I'm back at a point where I feel I could afford to lose some weight and get some new clothes and make myself a little bit more presentable. The dilemma I always had with those characters was like how successful, like the way I look at some of the ultra successful people is they know what it takes to become part of the 1%. They know how to sustain that once they get there, and therefore they should kind of know how to become elite in other areas. So um, if I become like an elite athlete, I know how much time and practice might have been put into gaining that skill. So if I pick up like a musical instrument or something, I might know how much effort is involved in becoming a virtuoso or something, and what's involved in maintaining my skills. But the problem I had with these characters was like how much they were 5 star athletes. Certainly, I am not a 5 star athlete in real life. I don't play basketball. I'm too short to play basketball. I'm too short to play hockey even. But the character was a goalie. He was famous in high school for never letting up a goal, and that had something to do with the personality of the character, where he felt embarrassed to let the puck go by him. So he was like OCD, where he would. I have him on a talk show speaking to Jay Leno, and he's describing the agony of being a goalie. He says, "I hate it because there's so much anxiety from trying to keep that puck from going behind me. It's not. It's one of the reasons why I opted not to go into the sport. That's the justification for the character, not for not going into the NHL. But so he says it's a tremendous strain on the heart to prevent the puck from going behind him. And some of the technologies, like some some of his wealth accumulation, starts with the technology from hockey, where where they have that roll cage. Let me just search hockey helmet. So like on the goalie mask, they have this cage. So he has a single piece of glass, which of course is anti-fog, and it's one way where he can see out, but you can't see in, and that way they could extend their fancy graphic logos onto the face mask. And I thought of like the competition committee, because eventually I adopted Gunner Glass, which is that yellow tint, so it would be anti-reflective from the bright ice. And I was thinking, like, could this be a competitive advantage? But that's where he gets his in as a silent business partner, and then he starts accumulating wealth, and he has lofty goals. And but can you be a five-star athlete and a intelligent individual, be rich, be a music producer, be an athlete? How many things can you be good at? A lot of the story he spends operating under an alias, and he's a music producer who wears a helmet like Daft Punk to hide his identity. That's how he spends most of his time during the Greek tragedy phase, under a mask. And when they reconcile, he unmasks. He takes off his mask, and he goes on late night talk shows with his girlfriend, and he has his "I'm in love with Katie Holmes" moment. He sings a song to this girl. Um, and the female, she's a five-star athlete. She goes on to Harvard Med. She takes over as CEO of the company he was a silent business partner in. And like, she starts accumulating wealth. And she gets part of the reason why she gets appointed CEO is for sex appeal. So I he he wants his CEO. She's smart, she's driven, and she's also good looking. So he thought that she would make a good CEO for his company. He promotes her, and he promotes her because her sexuality. She kind of takes command of the room, and he thought that would be an effective business strategy to make other people uncomfortable in board meetings and whatnot. So if I had an audience to poll, I would ask them, do I have to experience everything that my character experienced in the story in order for it to be a true adaptation? Or am I allowed to create some fictitious environments? If I say that my character was a Duke recruit, do I have to train myself to be eligible to be recruited by Duke? Do I have to become that type of athlete? If I say I did independent research under a world-renowned neuropsychologist at Duke University, do I have to do that in order to have it, in order for the story to qualify as an adaptation of my life? At what point does it become fantasy? Anyway, I'm going to get back to my work. I hope I'm doing well in my work. A little less lofty goals in my clinical psychology PhD pursuits. In the story, he was very interested in neuropsychology and distortions of the mind and distorted views, which is, I am interested in conscious studies and consciousness studies and different perspectives, but my goals as a clinical psychologist are to treat individuals who are victim of sexual abuse, who are experiencing PTSD, and who are experiencing complex grief. I want to offer my skills more of a counseling psychologist than anything, where he was more mad science-esque in the story, where a lot of his motives were to accumulate wealth without drawing attention to himself as a monopoly. He had intentions of, it's not really fully discussed in the story, but space exploration. He wanted to build a space suit that was able to withstand the heat of the sun without being destroyed. And he was thinking of different modes of space exploration that weren't combustion engines, more like jump points. And that's why he needed the money.